I'm making a video report on what is the third anniversary of a report I sent to Tracphone. Tracphone is a phone that is handed out to people that are on public assistance. It's supposed to be a free phone. It is colloquially known on the streets, so to speak, as the Obama phone. As in, during the Obama administration, there was a program that was put into place that provided people who were on public assistance with these phones for free. There are terms. You're only allowed to acquire one within a certain period of time, and if you lose it or if it needs to be replaced, there are circumstances surrounding that. The first time I acquired one was in Chicago, Illinois in 2016. At that time, there were no requirements except that you be on some form of public assistance, including at a homeless shelter. At that time, I did not get one. When I first came to Houston in 2017, November 2017, I did attempt to acquire a SIM card. There was a distribution where there were people that were handing out SIM cards that were part of this Obama phone program, and the understanding was these SIM cards would work with any program. In order to do that, they said they needed a scan. They had a handheld camera, and they took a picture of your ID, and then they ran it through their clearance systematology, and then they gave you the SIM card. At that time, when they were running my ID card through the process, they said I didn't qualify. And they didn't say why. But what they also said is that each of those chips cost 33 cents. And this was very consternating to me because there's a very specific reference to an understanding that if you had a SIM card that was part of this program and the production cost was 33 cents per SIM card, and my concern was that it was some form of numerology or some form of metric coding to people who had these phones, and the fact that it was recurrently over and over again referred to as the Obama phone program, even though it persisted beyond Obama's term of office, was disconcerting to me. If you get the phone and you read through the terms associated with the phone, if you get the actual phones, they give you sometimes they give you a fold out, and in that fold out, it's very similar to getting one of those what they call burner phones, one of those phones you can get at the drugstore, where it's a prepaid card, and you don't necessarily have to register as a user. One of the things it says is that at any given time, they can switch the network you're on without telling you about it. And this was very concerning to me because a lot of times these phones that were given out to the homeless people, would have undercurrents or be connected to concurrent processes where the intonation associated with the radio frequency emitted from the phone was excitating people to entertain scenarios associated with violence. I also was concerned because some of these phones would have different features. Most of them are very basic, but they would have enough of a feature, for instance, that if you were in a public service provider or a shelter provider, including one that was supposedly faith based and not registered with any agency, then it would be connected to a bandwidth that would make references to Muslims and things associated with Muslim ritual despite being on site at a location that identified as Christian. This has been happening for years. Now, whether or not Tracphone specifically or these free phone programs specifically are associated with this correlation, or whether there is some other manipulation of bandwidth and radio frequency in the state of Texas specifically associated with so called Christian service providers, is difficult to say. Several times since I've been in Texas, what you'll see is that these free phone programs will set up right outside a Walmart. A very, very, very common location for these free phone programs is right on the corner before the major entrance to the Walmart. It has happened in both Houston and it happened in both Dallas. It's very frequent. In Houston, the Walmart was right off of the train line, and almost every time I walked by or through where the Walmart was located, they had that free phone program right on the corner outside the Walmart. And so the correlation between Tracphone and the Tracphone system and the Walmart is of concern to me as well. I also have since then done research on past appropriations bill leading up to the Obama phone program. In both 1993, 2005, and 2008, there were significant changes in the appropriations bills discussing alterations to policy associated with bandwidth access, including the capacity for the President of the United States to declare certain bandwidth to his exclusive use because it serves some sort of national security purpose. I believe that this has been associated with acts of impropriety and abuse of power, including violations of the Constitution, especially associated with dissidents or with people that are political dissenters, up to and including ones that could potentially unseat a president, were they to have been availed of a possibility of running for public office without being obstructed or extorted, i.e., the president can have the roost in determining who his opposition is or who might be able to successfully present charges that would challenge his legitimacy as a head of state and then claim their bandwidth. It's a lot easier if they've had prior medical treatment, including prior medical treatment that has availed itself of stolen electronic accounts, up to and potentially including campaign accounts, up to and potentially including accounts associated with electronic media that might have presented information about that candidate's platform, or that candidate's community, and up to and including access to the bandwidth of locations where those people are forced to go for any number of reasons. That can include a hospital, that can include a public service provider, that can include a public facility like a courthouse, places where there would be some other justification for manipulating or interfering with the bandwidth in the locale, and then in the course of doing that, allowing for electronic accounts to be run on that individual that creates some kind of dissonance or that excitate or trigger episodes of violence on site. Now, if that person is allowed to be put into a systematology where there are concurrent accounts associated with that person's identity running in foreign theaters, then that person can be used in a proxy detonation or proxy excitation of violence in other parts of the world. This has been happening to me personally for 5 years that I've been actively tracking, and I believe it's been happening ever since 2005 through 2006. Now, this has been a process that has been outrolled for a long time, as certain people were identified to be, for some reason, allowed to be used as human test subjects in the rollout of these processes domestically, while they were paired with or polled with people in other parts of the world. And that one of the primary means by which it is accomplished is through overt, deliberate, intentional abuse of the office of the president, as well as those that co conspire with the president in alleged national security roles. Now, the actual national security value of such processes is dubious at best. I think more than actually allowing for an effective execution of the role of president, what it does is it reveals a propensity, especially in the United States, to reward criminal behavior with high political office. An actual functioning presidential office does not need to engage in these kind of unconscionable clandestine activities to accomplish domestic or foreign policy goals. You do not have to engage in dirty warfare to be successful. And even if you need to engage in dirty warfare, you do not need to do it at this level and in this capacity. The question then becomes one of who else is advantaged in the private sector and in other aspects of society by these sorts of policies being allowed to promulgate. My understanding is that in the 1990s, under the presidency of Bill Clinton, and then more recently under the presidency of Donald Trump, but leading up until this moment, and members of the national security establishment associated with the Department of Defense have been very vocal in their concern about what it means to allow for certain kinds of bandwidth to be made available for the private sector, including the private sector that would use it for commercial purposes it is unsuited to. These certain bandwidths are intentionally aimed at being made available for the functioning of national security, which means that these members of the Department of Defense and these members of the military establishment would be following policy priorities set by the president. Now, if part of the reason why they think it should not be available to the private sector is because the policy aims of the president are ones that, were they to be discovered, would reveal the United States to be in a position of breaking laws, acting immorally or unconscionably, or even just being inept at actual execution of national security goals, well, that's for them to actually deal with and take responsibility for. But the military is under the helm of a civilian leadership that is responsible for applying the Constitution and serving the people of the United States, not the personal private sector interest of anybody that's able to manipulate their way into the office of the presidency, including under dubious pretenses that they did so through an electoral process, without addressing appropriately the abuse of power that has gone into claiming access to bandwidth in order to manipulate political opposition. We are not going to have an honest conversation about election interference, either domestically or internationally. We have now had more than 5 years, 5 active years, where these policies around access to bandwidth have been disabused by people that for some reason were able to access bandwidth necessary to manipulate political processes and to visit reprisal upon political opposition, while also aiding and abetting acts of domestic and international terrorism in an effort to leverage it for their political goals. This is not acceptable.